The dishwasher was leaking again, and my wife was working late again. Two things that happened with the same goddamn frequency in my life these days. I crouched under the kitchen sink, wrench in hand, listening to the steady drip, drip, drip that had been driving me insane for 3 weeks. Kind of like my marriage. Dave, you still under there? My 15-year-old daughter Lexi poked her head around the corner, backpack slung over her shoulder. Smart kid. Too smart for her own good sometimes. Yeah, kiddo. Just having a heart-to-heart with this piece of garbage disposal. I wiggled the connection, and water sprayed across my face. Perfect. Your mom call? She texted, said she'll be home around 10. Again. Lexi's voice carried that edge teenagers get when they're trying not to sound judgmental, but failing miserably. Jake's picking me up for the movies. Jake, huh? The one with the motorcycle? Or the one with the criminal record? Dad, he's 17 and works at GameStop. Same thing. I crawled out from under the sink, wiping grease off my hands with an old rag. My knees cracked like bubble wrap. 41 years old and already falling apart. Be home by 11. Mom lets me stay out until midnight. Mom lets you do a lot of things. The words came out sharper than I intended. Lexi's face fell, and I immediately felt like an ass. Sorry, sweetheart. 11:30, okay? She nodded and headed for the door. Dad? Maybe you should just call a plumber, if only it were that simple. After she left, I stood in my kitchen, looking around at the life I'd built. 3-bedroom house in Parma Heights, just outside Cleveland. Decent neighborhood, decent schools, decent everything. Marla and I had bought this place 12 years ago, back when she still laughed at my jokes and didn't flinch when I touched her shoulder. Now she worked late 4 nights a week at Hartman Insurance, came home smelling like someone else's cologne, and treated me like a roommate she barely tolerated. The kind of roommate who left dishes in the sink and forgot to replace the toilet paper. My phone buzzed. Text from Greg, my best friend and fellow member of the Wives Who Work Late Club. Beer? Murphy's Tavern. Need to complain about life. I texted back, on my way. Dishwashers still winning. Murphy's was the kind of dive bar where the beer was cold, the pretzels were stale, and nobody asked too many questions about why you were drinking alone on a Tuesday night. Greg was already there, hunched over a Budweiser and looking like someone had stolen his lunch money. Let me guess, I said, sliding onto the bar stool next to him. Rachel's working late again? Book club. He made air quotes with his fingers. Every Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday. They must be reading War and Peace at the speed of molasses. The bartender, a guy named Mickey who'd been serving drinks since the Carter administration, slid a beer my way without being asked. You boys look like someone died. Just our marriages, I said, raising my bottle in a mock toast. Here's to working late and book clubs. Greg clinked his bottle against mine. You know what gets to me? I actually believed it for the first month. I was proud of Rachel for broadening her horizons, reading more. I even bought her one of those fancy bookmarks with the tassel. What gave it away? She came home talking about how much she loved The Great Gatsby. With a C. Apparently, it's about a cat who throws parties. Greg took a long pull from his beer. Even I know it's Gatsby, and I haven't read a book since high school. I laughed, but it came out hollow. Marla's gotten creative too. Last week she told me she was staying late to reorganize the filing system, on a Saturday. Ouch! Yeah, and get this, she came home with her hair done and makeup perfect. Either Hartman Insurance has the world's best bathroom lighting, or she made a pit stop somewhere else. We sat in comfortable misery for a while, watching SportsCenter on the TV above the bar. The Indians were losing again, which seemed appropriate. You ever think about just asking her straight out? Greg said eventually. What? Hey, honey, are you cheating on me? That's a conversation that ends well. Better than sitting here drinking beer and feeling sorry for yourself. Is it, though? I gestured around the bar. This is peaceful. No lies, no pretending everything's fine, No walking on eggshells. Just beer and the honest acknowledgement that life sucks sometimes. Greg raised his bottle again. To honest acknowledgement. To honest acknowledgement. I got home at 9:30 to find Marla's car already in the driveway. Strange. She'd said 10 in her text to Lexi. I sat in my truck for a minute, gathering my thoughts and trying to decide if I cared enough to start a fight. The house was dark except for the light in our bedroom. I found Marla in the bathroom, washing her face with the kind of determination usually reserved for removing evidence. "Hey," I said from the doorway. "Thought you'd be later?" She jumped, nearly dropping the washcloth. "Jesus, Dave. You scared me." "Sorry. How was work?" "Fine. Long. Boring." She avoided eye contact, focusing intently on her reflection in the mirror. "Did you fix the dishwasher?" "Still working on it." I watched her face in the mirror, looking for tells. Marla had always been a terrible liar, but lately she'd been getting better at it. Practice, I supposed. "Anything interesting happened today?" "Not really. Just the usual insurance stuff." She turned around, finally meeting my eyes. "I'm exhausted. I think I'll just go to bed." "It's not even 10. Long day." She brushed past me, and I caught a whiff of cologne. Not mine. Something expensive and cloying, the kind of scent a man wears when he's trying too hard to impress someone. I stood in the bathroom for a long time after she'd gone to bed, staring at myself in the mirror. 41 years old, thinning hair, laugh lines that were starting to look more like worry lines. When had I become the kind of man whose wife needed to lie to him? The next morning, Marla was gone before I woke up. Early meeting, according to the note she'd left on the kitchen counter, right next to the still-leaking dishwasher. Lexi found me there 20 minutes later, coffee mug in hand, staring at the note like it might reveal some hidden truth. "Dad, you okay?" "Just thinking about plumbing," I said. "And other things that are broken." She sat down across from me at the kitchen table, studying my face with the intensity only teenagers could muster. "Is everything all right with you and Mom?" The question I'd been dreading. How do you explain to your 15-year-old daughter that her mother might be cheating without sounding like a paranoid lunatic? "We're just going through a rough patch, sweetheart." All couples do. "She's been different lately." "Different how?" Lexi shrugged, but I could see the wheels turning behind her eyes. Happier, I guess. But not happy about being here. Happy about something else. Out of the mouths of babes. That afternoon, I made a decision that would change everything. I drove to Hartman Insurance. The office was in a strip mall between a nail salon and a Chinese restaurant, the kind of place that screamed, small-time operation. I'd been there exactly twice in the 15 years Marla had worked there. Once for a Christmas party, once to pick her up when her car was in the shop. I parked across the street and waited. Felt like a stalker, but I needed to know. Needed to see with my own eyes what working late actually meant. At 5:30, the lights went out. At 5:35, Marla walked out with her friend Tori, both of them laughing about something. They stood by Marla's car for a few minutes, talking animatedly. Tori kept gesturing with her hands, and Marla kept looking around like she was afraid someone might be watching. Someone was. At 5:40, a silver BMW pulled into the parking lot. I recognized the driver immediately, even though I hadn't seen him in 20 years. Brian Callahan. Slick to his friends, though I'd never understood why. He'd graduated 2 years ahead of Marla and me from Valley Forge High School, where he'd been captain of the wrestling team and owner of the greasiest hair in Cuyahoga County. Apparently, some things never changed. Marla got into the BMW. Tori got into her own car and drove away. And I sat there in my truck, watching my wife drive off with her high school boyfriend, feeling like the biggest fool in Ohio. I followed them. Not proud of it, but there it was. 20 years of marriage, and I was tailing my wife like some cut-rate private investigator. They drove to Callahan's Auto Sales on Brook Park Road, a lot full of cars that had seen better decades. The kind of place where previously owned meant probably stolen, and the warranty lasted about as long as it took to drive off the lot. I parked behind a Wendy's across the street and watched through binoculars I'd borrowed from Lexi's camping gear. Felt ridiculous, but not as ridiculous as I was about to feel. Marla and Slick disappeared into the office trailer at the back of the lot. The lights stayed on for exactly 47 minutes. When they came out, Marla's hair was messed up and Slick was grinning like he'd just won the lottery. They kissed. Right there in the parking lot, under the flickering neon sign that advertised quality pre-owned vehicles, my wife of 20 years kissed another man like I didn't exist. I drove home in a daze, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. Part of me had been hoping I was wrong, that there was some innocent explanation for the late nights and the cologne and the sudden interest in personal grooming. Part of me had been prepared to feel foolish for doubting her. Instead, I felt something else entirely, something cold and calculating and completely foreign to my usual easygoing nature. I felt like planning. The house was empty when I got there. Lexi was at Jake's, and Marla was presumably still working late. I went straight to our bedroom and started searching. I found the burner phone in her jewelry box, hidden behind a pair of earrings I'd given her for our anniversary. The same anniversary she'd forgotten last month. The phone was full of text messages that made my stomach turn. Not just the usual, "I miss you," and "when can we be together" garbage, but detailed descriptions of what they'd done in that office trailer and what they planned to do next time. There were photos, too. Nothing pornographic, thank God, but plenty of selfies of them together. Marla looked happier in those pictures than she'd looked at home in years. I scrolled through weeks of messages, each one a small knife in my chest. They'd been planning this for months, not just the affair, but what came after. Marla was going to leave me. She was going to take half of everything and move in with Slick, and they were going to live happily ever after on my dime. There was even a message about Lexi. She'll adjust. Kids are resilient. That's when the cold feeling in my chest turned into something else, something hot and sharp and absolutely unforgiving. I took pictures of everything with my own phone, then put the burner back exactly where I'd found it. Evidence. I was going to need evidence. Marla came home at 10:15, humming some song I didn't recognize. She found me in the living room, watching the news and drinking a beer like nothing had changed. "Hey," she said, kissing the top of my head. The same lips that had been on Brian Callahan 2 hours earlier. "How was your day?" "Productive," I said. "Fixed the Henderson's furnace, cleaned out 3 air ducts, and learned some interesting things about relationships." She paused in the doorway, something flickering across her face. "Oh? What kind of things? Just that you never really know someone, you know? Even after 20 years. I took a sip of my beer and looked directly at her. "People can surprise you." "I suppose they can." She was trying to read my expression, but I'd gotten good at hiding my thoughts lately. "I think I'll take a shower." "Good idea. You smell like car exhaust." She went upstairs, and I sat there in the dark, planning my next move. If revenge was a dish best served cold, I was about to prepare a 5-course meal. The next morning I called in sick to work. First time in 3 years, but I had research to do. Callahan's Auto Sales had been in business for 15 years, according to their website. Brian had inherited it from his father, expanded it from a small used car lot to a premier automotive destination. The website was full of testimonials from satisfied customers and photos of Brian shaking hands with people who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. I drove by the lot 3 times that day, learning the routine. Brian showed up around 9, spent most of his time in the office trailer, and left around 6. He drove a different car every day, test driving the merchandise, I supposed. Today it was a red Mustang convertible that had probably been someone's midlife crisis before it ended up on his lot. There were 2 other employees, a mechanic named Ray, who looked like he'd been working on cars since the Model T, and a secretary who couldn't have been older than 22. Both of them seemed to give Brian a wide berth, which told me everything I needed to know about his management style. But the real prize was parked in the back corner of the lot, under a custom car cover. I got a glimpse of it when Ray moved the cover to check something, a 1969 Camaro SS, pristine condition, obviously Brian's pride and joy. The kind of car a man spent his weekends polishing and his evenings talking about. The kind of car that would make a very public statement if something went wrong with it. I spent the rest of the day at the library, researching automotive sabotage. Not the kind that would hurt anyone. I wasn't looking to commit murder. But the kind that would cause maximum embarrassment at minimum risk. Sugar in the gas tank was a myth. Sand in the oil was too dangerous. But a small hole in the radiator hose, positioned just right, would cause a spectacular failure at exactly the wrong moment. Especially if that moment happened to be during the dealership's big Memorial Day sale, when half the neighborhood would be watching. I drove home feeling better than I had in weeks. For the first time in months, I had a purpose. Lexi was in the kitchen when I got there, doing homework at the table. She looked up when I walked in, and I could see the question in her eyes. "Dad? Can I ask you something?" "Shoot. Are you and Mom getting divorced?" The question hit me like a punch in the gut. I sat down across from her, trying to figure out how to answer without lying. "Why would you ask that?" "Because you've been acting weird, and she's never here anymore, and when she is here, you two barely talk." Lexi closed her textbook and looked at me with eyes that were far too old for 15. Plus, Amber's parents got divorced last year, and it started exactly like this. Amber. Lexi's best friend, whose mother had run off with her tennis instructor. Great. "Your mom and I are having some problems," I said carefully. "But we're trying to work them out." "Are you really?" "Because it doesn't look like you're trying. It looks like you're both just pretending everything's fine while you figure out how to hurt each other. Sometimes I forgot how smart my daughter was. Sometimes I wished she wasn't quite so perceptive." "What do you want me to do, sweetheart?" "I want you to fight for her." Lexi's voice was fierce, almost angry. "I want you to stop moping around and do something. Either fix it or end it, but stop making all of us miserable." She was right, of course. I was going to do something, just not what she had in mind. That night, after Marla had gone to bed early again, I sat in my garage and planned Brian Callahan's public humiliation. If he wanted to steal my wife, he was going to pay for the privilege. Memorial Day weekend. The perfect time for a car sale and the perfect time for a very public disaster. I'd spent the week preparing. 3 trips to the auto parts store for supplies, 2 practice runs past the dealership to time the security patrols, and 1 very careful study of that beautiful 1969 Camaro. The plan was simple. Saturday morning, while Brian was setting up for the big sale, I'd slip onto the lot and make a tiny adjustment to his pride and joy. Nothing dangerous, nothing that would hurt anyone. Just a small puncture in the radiator hose, positioned to fail spectacularly when the engine got hot. The beauty of it was the timing. Brian always started the day by firing up the Camaro and driving it to the front of the lot, where it would sit gleaming in the sun, drawing customers like a magnet. The local news station was even coming to film a segment about Memorial Day car deals. It was going to be perfect. Saturday morning dawned bright and clear. Perfect weather for a car sale, perfect weather for revenge. I drove to the lot at 7 a.m., an hour before Brian usually arrived, and parked behind the dumpster where the security cameras couldn't see me. Getting onto the lot was easier than I'd expected. The fence was chain link, maybe 6 feet high, with gaps near the bottom where the ground had settled. I squeezed through like a middle-aged ninja and made my way to the back corner where the Camaro waited under its cover. The car was even more beautiful up close. Midnight blue with white racing stripes, chrome so polished I could see my reflection. Brian had probably spent more on this car than I made in 6 months. I popped the hood and found the radiator hose. 1 small puncture with an ice pick, positioned where it would hold until the engine heated up, then fail catastrophically. I was in and out in 5 minutes, leaving no trace except a tiny hole that wouldn't be visible until it was too late. I was back in my truck, parked across the street at McDonald's, when Brian arrived at 8:30. Right on schedule. He went through his usual routine, unlock the office, turn on the lights, fire up the coffee pot. Then he walked out to the Camaro, pulled off the cover with a flourish, and climbed behind the wheel. The engine roared to life with a sound like thunder. Brian revved it a few times, grinning like a kid with a new toy, then put it in gear and drove slowly toward the front of the lot. I checked my watch. The news crew was supposed to arrive at 9. Brian would want the engine nice and hot for the cameras, maybe rev it a few times to show off that classic muscle car sound. At 8:55, the Channel 8 van pulled into the parking lot. The reporter was a perky blonde who looked like she'd rather be covering anything else, and the cameraman was already setting up his equipment. At 9 o'clock exactly, Brian fired up the Camaro again. The first sign of trouble was steam rising from under the hood. Just a wisp at first, barely visible. Brian didn't notice. He was too busy talking to the reporter, gesturing toward the car with the pride of a new father. The second sign was a small puddle forming under the engine. Green coolant, spreading slowly across the asphalt. The third sign was the temperature gauge, which I could see through the windshield as it climbed steadily into the red zone. Brian finally noticed something was wrong when the steam became a full-blown cloud, billowing out from under the hood like a small volcano. He popped the hood to investigate, and that's when things got interesting. The punctured hose, weakened by heat and pressure, chose that exact moment to fail completely. A geyser of boiling coolant erupted from the engine bay, soaking Brian from head to toe and sending him stumbling backward into the reporter. The cameraman, bless his professional heart, kept filming. Brian was screaming, partly from the hot coolant, mostly from watching his prized possession fall apart in front of a television audience. He tried to shut off the engine, but the damage was done. Coolant was everywhere, steam billowed out like a burst fire hydrant, and the beautiful Camaro was making noises like a wounded animal. The reporter, now soaked in coolant and clearly regretting her career choices, gamely tried to continue her segment. "Well, folks, it looks like we're having some technical difficulties here at Callahan's Auto Sales." That's when the engine seized. The sound was indescribable, a grinding, shrieking noise that could probably be heard 3 blocks away. The Camaro shuddered once and stopped, leaving nothing but the hiss of escaping steam and Brian's anguished wails. "Cut! Cut the camera!" Brian was frantically waving his arms, but it was too late. The damage was done, literally and figuratively. I sat in my truck, sipping coffee and watching the chaos unfold, feeling better than I had in months. The first course of my revenge meal had been served, and it was delicious. The news segment aired that evening. They edited out most of Brian's profanity, but they left in the spectacular engine failure and his humiliated expression. The reporter managed to salvage the piece by turning it into a cautionary tale about buying used cars from dealers who couldn't maintain their own vehicles. The comments on the news station's Facebook page were brutal. If he can't keep his show car running, what does that say about the cars he's selling? Classic Callahan, all flash, no substance. My cousin bought a car there last year. Transmission died 2 weeks later. But the real entertainment was at Murphy's Tavern that night. Greg was already there when I arrived, and he had news. "Did you see Channel 8 tonight?" he asked, grinning like the Cheshire Cat. "Missed it." "Why?" "That sleazeball Brian Callahan had his car blow up on live television. Funniest thing I've seen all year." Greg took a long pull from his beer. "Couldn't have happened to a nicer guy." "You know Brian?" "Know of him. Sold my brother-in-law a lemon 3 years ago. Piece of garbage broke down before he got it home." Greg shook his head. "Guy's been running that scam for years. About time karma caught up with him. I ordered a beer and tried to look appropriately sympathetic." "That's rough. Losing your show car on television." "Rough? It's beautiful. Poetic justice. Greg raised his bottle in a toast. Here's to public humiliation and mechanical failure. I'll drink to that. We clinked bottles, and I felt a warm glow that had nothing to do with the alcohol. This was just the beginning. When I got home, Marla was in the living room, staring at her phone with the expression I couldn't quite read. She looked up when I walked in, and for a moment, I thought I saw something like fear in her eyes. "Hey," she said, too casually. "Where were you?" "Murphy's with Greg. Why?" "Just wondering." She turned back to her phone, but I could see her hands shaking slightly. "Did you hear about that car dealer on the news?" "Which one?" "Brian Callahan. Had some kind of accident during a news interview." I sat down across from her, studying her face. "Sounds familiar. Didn't we go to school with a Brian Callahan?" "Maybe. I don't really remember." The lie came easily, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. "It's just weird, you know? Things like that don't usually happen." "No," I agreed. "They don't." She went to bed early again, claiming a headache. I stayed up late, planning my next move. The Camaro had been just the opening act. The real show was about to begin. The burner phone was buzzing constantly now. I'd started checking it every morning after Marla left for work, documenting the increasingly frantic messages between her and Brian. "What the hell happened to the car?" She'd texted the night of the news incident. "Don't know. Radiator hose blew. Worst possible timing." "You don't think..." "Think what?" "Never mind. Probably just bad luck." But Brian wasn't convinced it was bad luck. His messages over the next few days revealed a growing paranoia that someone was targeting him. He was right, of course, but he had no idea who or why. That was about to change. I'd done more research on Brian Callahan, and what I'd found was fascinating. The man was a walking disaster of poor decisions and questionable ethics. 3 complaints with the Better Business Bureau, 2 lawsuits from customers who'd bought lemons, and 1 very interesting detail about his personal life. He was married. Pam Callahan had been Pam Morrison in high school, a quiet girl who'd somehow ended up with the greasiest hair in the senior class. She worked part-time at the library now, and according to her Facebook page, she spent most of her free time posting inspirational quotes about trust and marriage. The irony was delicious. I drove to the library on Tuesday afternoon during Pam's shift. She was working at the information desk, helping an elderly man find books about gardening. She looked older than I remembered, but then again, we all did. 23 years since graduation would do that to a person. I waited until the gardener left, then approached the desk with a book I'd grabbed at random. "Excuse me, are you Pam Morrison? From Valley Forge High School?" She looked up, squinting slightly. "Yes, but it's Pam Callahan now. Do I know you?" "Dave Jensen. I was a couple years behind you." Recognition dawned slowly. "Oh, right. You married Marla Dorsey." "Still am." I smiled, letting that sink in. "I heard you married Brian Callahan. How's that working out?" Something flickered across her face. "Fine." "Why?" "Just curious. I heard he had some car trouble recently. Saw it on the news." "Yes, that was unfortunate." She was studying my face now, looking for something. "Why are you asking?" I leaned closer, lowering my voice. "Because I think there are some things you should know about your husband." Her face went pale. "What kind of things?" I pulled out my phone and showed her one of the photos I'd taken from Marla's burner. Nothing explicit, just Brian and my wife sitting very close together in his office, her hand on his chest. Pam stared at the photo for a long moment, her face cycling through confusion, recognition, and finally, rage. "When was this taken?" she whispered. "Last week. There are more." She looked around the library, making sure no one was watching, then leaned across the desk. "Show me." I showed her 3 more photos, each one more damning than the last. Pam's hands were shaking by the time I finished. "I knew it," she said, so quietly I could barely hear her. "I've known for months, but I couldn't prove it. He comes home smelling like perfume, stays out late, lies about where he's been." She looked up at me with eyes full of pain and anger. "Your wife?" "My wife." "How long?" "At least 3 months, maybe longer." Pam closed her eyes and took a deep breath. When she opened them again, something had changed. The hurt was still there, but it had been joined by something harder. "What do you want from me?" she asked. "Nothing. I just thought you deserved to know." "Bullshit." Her voice was sharp now, cutting through the library quiet. "You want something. What is it?" I had to admire her directness. "I want him to pay for what he's done. To both of us." "And how exactly do you propose we do that?" I smiled. "Leave that to me. Just keep your eyes open, and maybe don't mention this conversation to Brian." She nodded slowly. "I won't. But Dave? Yeah? When you make him pay, I want to watch." That evening, I put phase 2 of my plan into action. I'd spent hours crafting the perfect anonymous email, full of juicy details about Brian's business practices and personal life. Nothing libelous, nothing that couldn't be verified, just a comprehensive list of complaints from former customers and some very interesting observations about his marriage. I sent it to every local news station, the Better Business Bureau, and the Cleveland Plain Dealer's consumer affairs reporter. Then I sat back and waited for the fireworks to begin. They didn't take long. The Plain Dealer ran a story 3 days later. Local car dealer faces customer complaints. It wasn't front-page news, but it was thorough. They'd interviewed 6 customers who'd bought lemons from Callahan's, documented the outstanding lawsuits, and raised questions about the dealership's business practices. The story also mentioned Brian's recent mechanical difficulties during the television interview, suggesting a pattern of poor vehicle maintenance. Brian's response was predictable. He called the newspaper, demanding a retraction. He threatened to sue. He claimed he was being targeted by competitors who were jealous of his success. None of it worked. The story had legs, and it was spreading through social media like wildfire. The dealership's Facebook page was flooded with negative comments. Their Google reviews plummeted overnight. But the real damage was happening at home. According to Marla's burner phone, Pam had confronted Brian about the affair. She hadn't mentioned my involvement, but she'd made it clear that she knew what was going on. "She knows," Brian had texted Marla. "Don't know how, but she knows." "What are we going to do?" "Lay low for a while. Let things cool down. I can't keep living like this. Just give me some time to figure things out." But time was the one thing I wasn't planning to give him. The next phase of my plan required more direct action. I waited until the following Saturday, when Brian would be at the dealership and Pam would be at work. Then I drove to their house in North Olmsted. The Callahan residence was a modest ranch on a quiet street, the kind of place where people minded their own business and kept their lawns neat. Perfect for what I had in mind. I parked around the corner and walked back, carrying a manila envelope full of printed emails and photos, evidence of the affair laid out in chronological order like a prosecutor's case file. I slipped the envelope under their front door and walked away. Pam would find it when she got home from work. Brian would find it when he got home from the dealership. And then the real fun would begin. I was back at Murphy's Tavern that night when my phone rang. Unknown number, but I had a pretty good idea who it was. "Hello? You son of a bastard." Brian's voice was thick with rage and what sounded like alcohol. "I know it was you. I'm sorry, who is this?" "Don't play dumb, Jensen. The car, the newspaper, the photos, it was all you." I looked around the bar, making sure no one was listening, then walked outside to the parking lot. "I have no idea what you're talking about, Brian." "Bullshit. You've been watching us, haven't you? Following Marla, taking pictures. Following my own wife? That would be pretty pathetic, don't you think? You're going to pay for this. I'm going to destroy you. I laughed. With what? You're a two-bit car dealer whose business is circling the drain. Your wife knows you're a cheater. Your customers know you're a fraud. And the whole city knows you can't even maintain your own vehicles. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. But here's the thing, Brian, I continued. This is just the beginning. You took something that belonged to me. Now I'm going to take everything that belongs to you. I hung up and went back into the bar, feeling lighter than I had in months. The war was officially declared, and I was winning. Brian's first move was predictable and stupid. He tried to intimidate me. I was working on Mrs. Patterson's furnace Tuesday morning when I saw the silver BMW parked across the street. Brian sat behind the wheel for 20 minutes, just watching the house, trying to look menacing. It might have worked on someone who hadn't spent months planning his destruction. I walked to my truck, grabbed some tools, and waved as he drove off. His next move was dumber. He called my boss. "Dave got a strange call," Jim Martinez said later. "Guy claims you've been harassing him. Brian Callahan, car lot on Brook Park. Says you've got a grudge, never heard of him." I lied. Sounded half drunk, talking about tips to newspapers, cars breaking down. Guilty conscience, maybe? "That's my guess," I said. Jim nodded. "Good. I don't want drama affecting business." That evening, I found Marla pacing with her phone. "We had an agreement," she hissed before hanging up. "Work?" I asked. "Yes, insurance." She avoided my eyes. "Dave, we need to talk. About us. Counseling," I almost laughed. After months of cheating, now she wanted therapy. What brought this on? "We're not happy." "Maybe we can fix things too late?" "I don't know." "Shouldn't we try?" It was a good act. If I hadn't seen the photos, I might have believed her. Instead, I smiled. "Sure. Let's try," because I had my own plans. Next morning, I called in sick and drove to the dealership. Brian looked wrecked. Camaro gone, cars marked sold, probably liquidating for lawyers. From McDonald's across the street, I watched. A customer walked out, unimpressed. Then a man with a briefcase served papers. At 11:30, Pam arrived. She drove through the gate carrying a bat. Brian ran from the office, hands raised. She smashed a Corvette windshield, then a sedan window, before cops hauled her away. I drove home grinning. It felt like watching a season finale. That night, dinner was quiet. Lexi filled the silence with school talk. When she went upstairs, Marla spoke. "Did you hear about that dealer? His wife smashed his cars. They arrested her. News said he was cheating. Sounds like domestic trouble." Marla set down her fork, watching me. "Dave, is there something you want to tell me?" "Like what?" "Like why you've been acting so strange lately. Like why you keep asking about my work schedule. Like why you seem so interested in other people's marital problems." I could have told her then, could have laid it all out. The photos, the texts, the months of lies and deception. Could have demanded an explanation, given her a chance to come clean, tried to salvage something from the wreckage of our marriage. Instead, I smiled and reached across the table to squeeze her hand. "I love you," I said. "That's all you need to know." She squeezed back, but I could feel her trembling. "I love you too," she whispered. Another lie. But this one was going to cost her everything. The end came on a Thursday night in June, exactly 4 months after I'd first followed Marla to the dealership. I'd spent weeks setting up the final act, making sure every detail was perfect. The timing, the location, the audience, everything had to be exactly right for maximum impact. The location was our house, specifically our backyard, during Lexi's 16th birthday party. I'd suggested the party, insisted on it actually. Told Marla it was time we did something normal as a family, invited all of Lexi's friends and their parents, turned it into a proper neighborhood celebration. Marla had been reluctant. She'd been reluctant about everything lately, but I'd worn her down. "It'll be good for us," I'd said. "Show everyone we're still a solid family." The guest list was carefully curated. Greg and Rachel, despite their own marital problems. Jim Martinez and his wife, 3 couples from our street. Lexi's friends and their parents. And at the last minute, a special surprise guest, Pam Callahan. She'd been released on bail after the baseball bat incident, and we'd stayed in touch. Not friends exactly, but allies in a common cause. She knew what I was planning, and she was more than happy to help. The party started at 6 p.m. By 7, the backyard was full of people eating burgers and drinking beer, watching Lexi open presents and blow out candles. Normal suburban family fun. Marla was playing the perfect hostess, chatting with neighbors, making sure everyone had enough to eat. She looked beautiful in a blue sundress I'd bought her for Mother's Day, back when I still thought our marriage might be salvageable. At 7:30, I stood up and tapped my beer bottle with a fork to get everyone's attention. "I'd like to make a toast," I announced, "to my daughter Lexi, who's growing up to be an amazing young woman. And to my wife Marla, who's taught her that honesty and loyalty are the most important things in any relationship." Everyone raised their glasses. Marla smiled and blew me a kiss, but I could see the confusion in her eyes. "But before we toast," I continued, "I think there's something everyone should see." I pulled out my phone and connected it to the Bluetooth speaker I'd set up earlier. "I've been working on a little slideshow. A celebration of family and friendship and the bonds that hold us together." The first photo appeared on the screen of my laptop, which was connected to a projector I'd borrowed from work. It showed Marla and me on our wedding day, young and happy and full of hope. 20 years ago, I said, I married the woman of my dreams. The next photo showed us with baby Lexi, exhausted but glowing new parents. We built a life together. A family, a home. More photos flashed by, birthdays, vacations, holidays, the story of a marriage told in Kodak moments. We promised to love, honor, and cherish each other. For better or worse, in sickness and health, till the end of our days. Marla was starting to look nervous now. She could sense where this was going, but she couldn't stop it without making a scene. "But sometimes," I continued, "people break their promises." The wedding photos disappeared, replaced by something else entirely. Marla and Brian Callahan, sitting close together in his office, her hand on his chest, his arm around her waist. "Sometimes," I said, my voice carrying clearly in the sudden quiet, "the person you trust most in the world decides that 20 years of marriage isn't worth as much as a few afternoons with a greasy car salesman." More photos appeared. Marla and Brian kissing in the parking lot, walking into a motel together. Text messages scrolled across the screen, intimate conversations between lovers planning their future together. "Dave, stop." Marla's voice was barely a whisper. "Stop what?" "Telling the truth?" I looked around the yard at the shocked faces of our friends and neighbors. Everyone deserves to know what kind of woman they've been celebrating tonight. Lexi was staring at her mother with tears streaming down her face. "Mom, is this real?" Marla opened her mouth to answer, but no words came out. "It's real, sweetheart," I said gently. "Your mother has been having an affair for months. She was planning to leave us and move in with her boyfriend." "That's enough!" Marla finally found her voice. "Turn it off, Dave. Turn it off right now." "Or what? You'll leave me?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You were going to do that anyway." The slideshow continued. Photos, text messages, a comprehensive documentation of betrayal and deceit. The guests stood frozen, unsure whether to leave or stay, watching our marriage implode in real time. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced, "I present to you Marla Jensen, wife, mother, and accomplished liar. Let's give her a round of applause for her performance as a faithful spouse." No one clapped. The silence was deafening. Marla was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks, her perfect hostess facade crumbling. You bastard! You sick, vindictive bastard! I'm vindictive? I'm not the one who spent 4 months screwing around behind my spouse's back. You don't understand. You don't know what it's been like, living with someone who doesn't care about anything, who's given up on life, who treats me like a roommate instead of a wife. So you decided to find someone who treated you like a whore instead? The slap came. Without warning, her palm connecting with my cheek with a sound like a gunshot. The pain was sharp and immediate, but it felt good. It felt like honesty. Feel better? I asked, touching my stinging cheek. She hit me again, harder this time. I let her. After months of lies and deception, physical violence was refreshingly straightforward. Stop it, Mom! Lexi was sobbing now, trying to get between us. Just stop! That's when Pam Callahan stepped out of the shadows where she'd been waiting. Hello, Marla, she said calmly. I don't think we've been properly introduced. I'm Pam Callahan, Brian's wife. Marla went white. What is she doing here? I invited her, I said. Thought you two should meet. Compare notes about your shared boyfriend. Pam smiled, but it was the kind of smile sharks probably wore before they bit someone. Brian sends his regrets. He couldn't make it tonight. He's in jail. What? Arrested this afternoon for insurance fraud. Turns out he's been staging accidents, filing false claims, all sorts of interesting things. Pam's smile widened. Amazing what the police can find when someone gives them a reason to look closely at a person's business practices. I hadn't known about the insurance fraud, but I wasn't surprised. Men like Brian Callahan always had skeletons in their closets. All it took was someone shining a light in the right direction. You're both insane, Marla said, looking around wildly for support. But the other guests were already starting to leave, gathering their things and heading for the exits, with the urgency of people fleeing a disaster. We're insane, Pam laughed. We're not the ones who threw away 20-year marriages for a few rolls in the hay with a criminal. Marla turned to run, but I caught her arm. Where are you going? The party's just getting started. Let go of me. Not yet. We're not finished. I looked around the yard at the remaining guests, my daughter, my neighbors, my friends, people who'd known us for years, who'd thought they understood who we were and what our marriage meant. I want everyone to remember this moment, I said. Remember what betrayal looks like. Remember what happens when someone breaks their promises and thinks they can get away with it. Marla was crying harder now, her body shaking with sobs. Please, Dave. Please stop. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Sorry you did it, or sorry you got caught. She didn't answer. Couldn't answer. I let go of her arm and stepped back. Ladies and gentlemen, the show is over. Thank you for coming to my daughter's birthday party. I hope you all learned something about the importance of honesty in relationships. The last few guests hurried away, leaving just me, Marla, Lexi, and Pam standing in the wreckage of what had once been a family celebration. What happens now? Lexi asked, her voice small and broken. Now your mother packs her things and leaves, I said, and we figure out how to move forward without her. Marla looked at me with something that might have been hatred. You've destroyed everything. Our marriage, our family, our daughter's birthday. Was it worth it? I considered the question seriously. Ask me in a year. She went inside to pack. Pam left with a promise to stay in touch. And I sat in my backyard with my daughter, watching the sun set on the life we'd known. Dad? Lexi said eventually. Yeah, sweetheart. I'm sorry this happened to you. I'm sorry it happened to all of us. Are you going to be okay? I looked around the yard at the decorations still hanging from the trees, at the birthday cake sitting untouched on the picnic table, the debris of a celebration that had turned into a funeral. Yeah, I said. I think I am. Marla came back outside an hour later, carrying 2 suitcases, and looking like she'd aged 10 years. She kissed Lexi goodbye, whispered something I couldn't hear, and walked to her car without looking at me. She drove away as the last light faded from the sky, leaving me and my daughter alone with the truth. It wasn't the ending I'd planned 20 years ago, when I'd promised to love and honor and cherish. But it was honest, and after months of lies and deception, honesty felt like victory. I'd won. Marla was gone, Brian was in jail, and everyone in our circle knew exactly what kind of people they really were. The king of small grudges had claimed his throne. But as I sat there in the dark, listening to my daughter cry herself to sleep upstairs, I wondered if winning was supposed to feel this empty. No matter. It was done. The debt was paid, the score was settled, and justice was served. Next time, maybe I'd get a wife who actually knew how to keep her promises.